Okay, Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Sure.
We've only had a few people representing VC culture on the show, so I'm really excited to started with you here.
Okay.
Before we get too far deep, could you give a quick intro on who you are?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Sarah. I work at Panache. We're a pre-seed and seed stage venture fund, investing primarily in Canadian founders. We've made around 100 investments to date over the last 4 years, and yeah, 30 plus of which have gone on to raise Series A's and beyond. Invest across all sectors, so flexible in terms of business model, category, and all of that. So we see it all.
Great. Of course, Panache Ventures is it's known very well in Toronto for those in the innovation industry. But before tracking that, I would love to dive into your VC journey of how you got into the VC field. Generally, people come one of two ways. They're heavily involved in finance, undergrad, etc., and they come in from a finance angle. Or two, people coming from a founder angle, they tried their hand at innovation at various stages, and that pushes them more into a support role.
Yeah.
For you, where do you stand? Like, what brought you into VC?
It's funny when I first joined Venture and I started having a bunch of intro calls with other associates at other funds, everyone would say, "Oh, I have a really unconventional path into VC." I think a lot of people think they have unconventional paths into VC, but I actually think one of the things that makes venture really exciting is, at least from like the fund perspective and working with other funds, is that a lot of people who are in venture came from very diverse backgrounds. And so for sure there's that kind of traditional finance background. For me, like my undergrad was in science, then I did a master's at Queen's in management, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and have operator experience running my own business myself. And then also worked at the Creative Destruction Lab in their artificial intelligence stream. And so that's kind of when I was at CDL, that was the first time that I had the experience of kind of having my hand in multiple different problem sets at once and being able to work with entrepreneurs and feel like I was adding value to entrepreneurs at the early stages. And so, um, yeah, I ended up getting connected with the Panache team through a mutual friend who I did my master's with, and also was familiar with the partners through their involvement at CDL. And so, was, I guess, connected to them in a couple of different regards. But yeah, for me, it was a bit of an interesting path where, I always thought I was going to go into science. My background originally was in science, and then a couple of like personal entrepreneurial experiences led me to learn more about the startup ecosystem, I think, from the operator perspective. So definitely have that kind of I would say lean more on that operator side with regards to like my experience and where I'm kind of able to add value to founders. Um, but yeah, it's been a really great journey being able to be on the investor side as well, and you just learn so much. And I also think having like it's really great to see a lot of VCs having that prior founder experience, because I think it helps you like understand that things aren't always going to be glossy and fantastic at the early stages. I mean, especially at the early stages. So yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting word there. You said, being an operator, and I find a lot of interest in that language, because generally when you hear about startups, you think about the Steve Jobs visionary, the
Yeah.
guy, the person who has the idea, the sees the holy mountain that no one else does and can lead us all towards that path. But the idea of an operator being a founder is very different, because we used to talk about it almost as a scale. You're either a visionary or an operator, and an operator sees as someone who more strategically sees a
Right.
gap in the market. Generally, having worked in different in different fields, or worked in one field very very long, or just by happenstance come across something and has something and sees it, but cultivates it as strategically, rather than this is the answer that's going to save humanity,
Right.
and I'm going to dictate my life around going towards that. So coming from an operator mindset of starting a company, was that how you looked at it? You saw a strategic gap and you went for it. or was it something that you like vocationally wanted to do? Like it's something that drove you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and also just like what we look for in venture is we want to see founders who are obsessed with the problem that they're solving rather than the solution they're building. And so, like, I think my experience was I had experienced a gap personally in a market where I felt there needed to be a more like scalable and tech-enabled solution. In my case, it was in the childcare market, and for us at Panache, we're looking for founders who, I mean, similarly are looking at like, here is something where I have, maybe founder problem fit, where the founder themselves have gone through a specific experience that's brought to light a, problem in the market or a gap in the market where they've said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to fix this problem. And I think that like it's great to talk to those visionary leaders who say, I've built this great thing. Everyone's going to love it. This is the answer. This is the solution. I think sometimes there are for sure breakout successes with those kinds of stories. But for the most part, I'd say we tend to lean towards looking for people who have that just like drive to solve a big problem for a lot of people, whether that means pivoting 4 or 5 times. Often it does mean pivoting 4 or 5 times. And I also think a big thing that VCs look for in founders, or an important quality of being a founder, is just being able to be resilient, because the market's going to change, your customer needs are going to change. And so being an operator and kind of rolling up your sleeves and being able to listen to that and pivot your solution to best fit the problem is I think what's going to help founders win ultimately.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, you spoke a lot about making founders win, and from that kind of mentality shift, right?
Yeah.
I find that people who are on the other side of the coin that have grinded themselves trying to build something are either become jaded
Mhm.
and look at other people in a more not a conservative but more skeptical outlook. It's like, or it gives you perspective, right?
Right.
In terms of this person's probably struggling with this, and makes you more empathetic. Have either of those realms came into play for you?
Um, I mean, I would say hopefully the latter.
Hmm.
A point in my career where I'm jaded yet, but I think that um I mean, definitely the latter. I think when you've gone through it yourself, you know that you start out with a strategy, whether that be like your go-to-market approach of, this is the specific
Hmm.
path I'm going to pursue to be able to acquire my customers. Like, to give a specific example, when I was first starting my business in childcare, I was like, I'm going to print out a million flyers for my company. I'm going to put so tons of guerrilla marketing. I'm going to put all these flyers in every mail box where I see a stroller outside because I think the family is a kid, and then they're going to sign up. It's going to be great. And I got 0 signups from that and was so deflated and defeated. And then I went through all of these different strategies to kind of experiment with my customer acquisition and all of that to ultimately land on the right one. And so now when I talk to founders and say they're in a building a D2C company or a marketplace, and they're experimenting with different go-to-market strategies, and they're like, oh, I still haven't figured that out. It's like I can empathize with that experience of, testing, needing to do testing and optimizing and all of that. And just like, I think when you go through that experience, you know that you just can't have all of the answers at upfront at all times. And so for sure, I think like it allows you to empathize with people who are at a similar stage to where you've been yourself.
Right. I remember when like Uber like was just taking off, like it was all over the news. All these Uber-like services came to be.
Yeah.
Marketplaces really took off, and and people saw there's an arbitrage to be made in putting tech wherever there's a supply and demand style business, and these like all these Uber-like kind of services come into play. And one of them, of course, was babysitting. Was that like a inspiration for you, like with Uber's success, or did you like coming from your own perspective as a market need?
I wouldn't say Uber, maybe, yes and no, I guess, in that
Mm.
I think platforms like Uber have created an expectation whereby consumers think and can just have things instantly. And so I think for me, it was more so there are really great platforms that exist to be able to find childcare for like a long term scenario where parents kind of have the time to go through and say, platforms where there's tons of profiles and, the onus is on the parents to go through and filter and interview them all and figure out who could be like a long term childcare solution. But there wasn't really like a tech enabled, scalable solution for families to say, I have a last minute date night, I have a last minute appointment, or I have to go to this business meeting and I need a babysitter in 2 hours that's CPR certified, XYZ. And so, yes, I think like in ways the platform was inspired by the Uber model of like automatic payments, and then you get your receipt, you don't have to pay the babysitter at the door, and just certain ways of like streamlining the whole experience to make it seamless and less painful for the end user, but generally felt that it was more a response to a lack of existing adequate solutions in the market.
So, I mean, diving from that, like, what was your experiences in running this babysitters sitting service?
Yeah. Yeah, so at first it was like tough. Absolutely. It was just, I mean, I spoke about my experience of making all those flyers. I walked, it was so hot all over the city of Toronto, put a flyer in every mailbox for like 2 weeks straight. And I was like, this is going to be the answer. And then, that times 15, where you just like think you've landed on something and then you have to iterate and experiment. But it's also just the most fun ever getting to build something and have that ownership and be able to build a brand that you believe in, and also just start to see like customers having positive experiences from something you've created. I think is a really incredible experience. Like I remember this dad who was a customer sent me a text that was like, I've been divorced for 2 years, I haven't been able to like find a provider that I trust with my kids to be able to go back and do my yoga for the last 2 years, and now that I have this sitter that I really trust, I'm able to do that and add it back into my regular routine and all of that. And so I think it's really great once you start to get that early customer validation and start to feel like you're building something that people really need is such a great feeling. And yeah, and then I mean ultimately I talk about this book and these resources a lot, but I don't know if you're familiar with Gabriel Weinberg, the founder of DuckDuckGo, but he wrote this book called Traction, where in it he kind of talks about all of the different customer acquisition channels that you can explore for your business, and explains this strategy called the Bullseye marketing method to getting traction, where basically you have this like outer ring of all of the potential customer acquisition strategies that you might choose to experiment with for your business. And so, you go through this exercise of how might, trade shows work for me, how might SEO optimization, XYZ, and that helps to eliminate the biases of what will automatically work for you, like my bias around guerrilla marketing. And then middle ring is what's actually feasible. Say it's COVID and you can't do any in-person stuff, you kind of cross off all of those. And then the middle ring is identifying 4 experiments where you say, okay, I'm going to choose 4 of these customer acquisition channels. I'm going to experiment with them for a couple of weeks and I'm going to test it out and see what works. And so for me, went through that experiment and then kind of landed on 2 customer acquisition channels that really worked for me, which was Google Ads and partnering with mom influencers. And so ended up growing the platform through those channels to 45 childcare providers and 50 families. And that kind of was a pretty stable growth and consistent and less time consuming strategy than putting flyers in the sweltering heat up in people's mailboxes.
I love that. It kind of reminds me of I think Michelle Romanoff, who's also went to, I think, Queen's University. I think you did your master's there.
Yeah.
And she also her first company, she was right, I think Bytopia, she was going on the sidewalks downtown Toronto and with chalk writing the daily menu items, and she would run around for the lunch and for the lunch rush. It's like, go to Bytopia and get your coupon and stuff like that. So yeah, this idea of definitely guerrilla marketing and putting that kind of sweat behind a tech company in terms of marketing is super interesting. And just I think I have a few final questions about your venture, and you know, did it start as you being a babysitter first, and then you try to scale that?
Yeah. So I was a babysitter all throughout and a nanny all throughout schooling. Like, since I was allowed to be left home alone, I was a babysitter since I was like was
Mhm.
nannying for kids on my street. And then when I was in my undergrad, I was a part-time nanny for 3 different families. And then when I was in my master's, I ended up having the opportunity to kind of co-run this boutique babysitting business, which is where I kind of identified that I felt there was an opportunity to really scale something in that space. And so, yeah, so I had a number of different experiences kind of in childcare, and just honestly have babysat for probably like 300 different families over the course of the last like 5 to 7 years. And so, yeah, it was kind of born out of personal experience. And I found that, like, I'd be putting my profile up on all of these, like Kijiji or random websites and stuff, and can just say, like, I'm CPR certified, which I was, and, police checked and all of that. But then no one was really verifying that. And I was like, I know I'm trustworthy, but as a parent, like, doesn't like it wouldn't feel great to know that nobody's really validating this. And, it's not like that's the promise of platforms like Kijiji or, whatever else exists today. But I did feel that there was an opportunity for a solution for parents who just don't have the time to do that and are looking for something a little bit more short term. And so, yeah, definitely was born out of my personal experience.
That's good to hear because based off my previous reference, the Uber for everything model that kind
Mhm.
of really spurred up after the Uber success. There was dog walking services, there babysitting services. There's all these different services that kind of popped up around the Uber-esque, Uber-like kind of model. But the issue was they were all focused on scale, and I think there was a babysitting version that got in trouble because they weren't actually verifying the
Oh,
babysitters.
yeah.
It was like they're trying to scale
Yeah.
so fast. They're just onboarding babysitters and matching people that and in the states they got in trouble. So
Yeah.
the fact that you took that time to definitely to chase the verification problem that already exists in the industry, I think that's really interesting. Cool. Diving a little bit deeper into first creative destruction lab, and
Yeah.
then even into your masters at Queens, which innovation focused. I'd love to dive deeper into that. How did that transition go into getting into creative destruction lab, and how did that come through?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I honestly think so. Maybe I can back up a bit and talk about kind of the journey of why I did my master's, and that's kind of how I ended up getting into CDL, or connected with them. But yeah, so when I was in my undergrad, my friend and I started this project. Sorry, I tried to exit my LinkedIn. I'm so sorry that I'm like it's popping
No
off. I
problem.
tried to sign out just now. But anyways, my friend and I started this photojournalism project. Do you know Humans of New York?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we didn't start that. That would be very cool. But we started. We noticed that a bunch of those kinds of pages were popping up in different universities, um, all over Canada, and there wasn't one in Guelph, which is where we did our undergrad.
Mm.
And so we started Humans of Guelph, and just started going up to people, taking their picture with their permission, asking them asking them to go for coffee with us, and all of that. And so through that, ended up growing the page to like 20K people in the community, and started to get involved in what existed of the startup ecosystem in Guelph. And so through that experience, I think that's what lit the original entrepreneurial fire in me, and made me want to learn more about just entrepreneurship, startup ecosystem, and all of that. And at that point, I was still, um, you know, in my undergrad in science. And so really just had I probably didn't even know the word venture capital, honestly. Like, I maybe
Yeah.
had watched Shark Tank or something, but I just like was not familiar with the terminology, the ecosystem, or any of that. And so went right into my master's out of my undergrad. And then that's when I started to learn more about kind of where all the different players sit in the ecosystem. So startup incubators, accelerators, VCs, all of that, angel investors. And so then when I was just working on my business full time, I also was just kind of immersing myself in the community as best I could. And so I actually had reached out to someone who was the prime stream lead at CDL just for a casual coffee chat. Like they weren't hiring at that point. I just kind of wanted to learn more about what they did. And then, yes, I think 6 or so months later was when I had reconnected with them. They mentioned that they were hiring and looking for someone to come on as a venture analyst. And so for me, like CDL felt like the perfect marriage of all of my interests in learning about how early stage startups are able to scale, being able to work in science, and also just better understand the startup ecosystem. And so felt like kind of the intersection of all of the things I was really interested in at the time. And so, yeah, ended up joining. I had no background in AI, but ended up joining the artificial intelligence stream and learned so much while I was there. We were building out a thesis at the time around ethical AI, so essentially like model developer tools focused on data privacy and model explainability and addressing algorithmic bias, which actually manifests itself in so many different applications that we know today. And so went down a very deep kind of reg tech hole where I learned a ton and so grateful for that experience. And now being at a generalist fund, it's just a totally different game of, I'm not really a specialist, I guess, in a specific hole anymore. I'm more general, and that comes with its own sets of benefits and challenges. And so, yeah, it's been those were kind of the experiences that led me to CDL and then where I am today. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. I mean, CDL is such a cool institution, especially with their focus on like deep tech and super
Yeah.
like left field moonshot ideas. But in terms of like a masters of innovation, this is like a master's of innovation almost seems like an oxymoron, right? Like
Yeah.
they always say you can't really teach innovation, you can't really teach entrepreneurship, something you have to do. But then all these institutions came out with these master's
Yeah.
programs. Even undergrads now, you can do an undergrad in innovation and entrepreneurship. What took you to the point where like you've already did a startup life? Why do the masters, and what did you gain out of it?
So I hadn't started my business
Okay.
until after my master's. I just kind of had that Humans of Guelph experience from my undergrad. And so for me, I was like, I only have a science background. First of all, I want to meet people in the ecosystem. Second of all, I just need to lay the foundation, which is exactly what the program did for me. Just the foundations of, what are the legal implications of starting a business? You have to incorporate, you have to think of trademarking your logo and just all of these different factors. And then like, how do you like make a financial model? What needs to be included in that? Just all of the like high level need to knows, kind of like starting a business 101 was actually like extremely helpful for me and just setting the basics. And it's not like it was a super deep dive into any of those topics, but it was really helpful in setting the foundation and at least teaching me kind of what I knew I needed to then go out and discover for myself. And so, yeah, I would say it was really helpful. I think certain elements of entrepreneurship can be taught. Honestly, like there are certain things like if people have tried to do psychometric analyses on founders of like you have to have this certain personality archetype, but there are founders who are super agreeable, and then of course there are founders who are not agreeable whatsoever. And so I don't think there's necessarily an archetype. I think there are certain threads amongst founders that are similar, like being resilient, being, as I mentioned before, obsessed with a problem. Sometimes being receptive to feedback is a good thing, sometimes not. And so I think that there are sometimes threads that you'll start to notice, but I do think it's helpful to have like that baseline education of what you kind of need to know from like a tactical sense.
Mm. That's really well put. I think there's I think the movies like The Social Network
Yeah.
threw off a whole generation of what entrepreneurship is. That you have to be a dropout, a university dropout,
Yeah.
in order to make it. It's like almost like you're saying no to these institutions, or like you're saying no to all like the traditional path, and you're making your own path. You're striking your own. But there's definitely a lot to like ingrained from, especially institutional knowledge. So cool. You got your master's in innovation. You went out, started your own startup. You went into the CDL. Um, just diving into the CDL for a bit there. I think I feel like that's like one of the ultimate like entrepreneurial playgrounds, right?
Yeah.
There's so many cool ideas. A lot of them moonshot ideas. Some of them very deep tech. You spoke about being in the machine learning stream. Uh, any cool companies you want to shout out that you saw coming out of there? You're like, whoa, this is some amazing stuff.
Cool companies. Well, yeah, I mean, Alttex. I'm giving a shout out to Alttex. I don't know if you know them. Do you know Alttex? Do you know Myra?
No, no,
Okay. We're also investors at Panache, so of course I'm going to shout them out.
of
But they're
course.
very cool. They were in the AI stream. They were in the Matter stream. But
Hmm.
basically, they've created a way to convert polyester alternative, and so like
Okay.
radically kind of changing the game in climate tech, and like creating sustainable fashion and all of that. And so just a really cool like deep tech science based innovation in the clean tech arena, and so really excited about what they're doing. But I mean, yeah, there's like so many really cool companies go through CDL. We're also investors in Sanctuary AI, which came out of CDL, and they're creating human like robots, which is pretty sweet. And so yeah, there's a number of really exciting companies that we've seen for sure.
Yeah, my favorite to follow out of the CDL are all the space companies.
Yeah,
I mean,
like
this.
Kepler and yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember the ones off the top of my head, but those for me are fantastic. I think CDL is like one of the only incubator networks that exists that like services such like left field, like moonshot ideas. Like other incubators, like want to look at you if you're trying to tackle space. It's like we have no way to support.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, perfect. So, I mean, what a segue over to VC. So, how did that conversation come up? Getting into VC, something that you wanted, thought was the next step in your evolution. Did it come up out of the CDL infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think like so the way it came up was a friend of mine who was already working in venture. She heard that Nash was hiring, and she knew that I had a specific interest in helping companies that were very early, kind of at that like 3-person team, early identification of product market fit, like just kind of have your MVP. And that was the stage I was working with when I was at CDL. And so when my friend heard Panache was hiring, she was like, the fund that invests in like the earliest companies in Canada is looking to grow their investment team, and I think you should chat with them. And so it came through her. But for sure, my experience at CDL, like, I mean, did I want to be a VC? Like, I wanted to be a forensic psychiatrist and I was an undergrad, and then I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and then I thought a little bit about like where do I fit best in the startup ecosystem. So I can't say it was like for sure I was born and knew I wanted to work in venture, or that it was even like a long-term goal of mine. But definitely when I was at CDL, I started to think seriously about that being a path that I might want to pursue, and really just because I enjoyed, like, I think the most fun part of it, and the most fun part of CDL was just getting to meet so many different founders and learn about just transformational business ideas when they're just in their infancy. And so that was a part of it that I found really exciting when I was at CDL, and what kind of sparked my interest in learning more about venture.
Yeah, I remember. I think out of CDL, one of my favorite connections that came out of it was John Francis.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
you
he's
know,
great.
Yeah, John did really open my eyes about venture, like because like from the other point of perspective, if you're a entrepreneur, you're forever looking for capital, right? You're looking for resources, and it always seems like, especially if you're new, that venture capital is always being given out to like those who are already friends of somebody, or like it's like how's that happening? Like if you're outside that bubble trying to get in, it's just like It's like, how are these decisions being made? I don't understand. My idea is great as well. But John had like a very different perspective, a different perspective how to be, how to support companies. And for him, he was like, I think he's a cardiologist before, and he's talked about companies in a different way. He's like, yeah, like people come with these great ideas, and then I'm like, okay, why wouldn't I put some capital into it? But then that capital buys me a voice there, and I get to play around with this company, build it up. Then I can call up from a few of my friends and say, hey, I've made some money for you before. Put some money into this company. I believe in it. I like the founder. And then we'll all come into it together, and we'll ideate and like see how we can help and do some sales and make some calls. And it's just like he talks about it like it was a fun thing to do, like a project, you would work on a project car with your buddies. You would work on this business venture together. And I think that type of mentality as an investor, of course, angel investor, like is like something like a co-pilot to your business, to your venture. It's like ultimately like such a refreshing way to look at investing. It's like, oh, it's just not money, but it's all these extra things that comes with it. And I think that's what a lot of like new entrepreneurs don't really see. They see it just like, oh, all this flashy money is being given around. It's capital to be burned, burn rate and run rates and all those kind of things. But operational support is something that's huge. And one of the things I really appreciate about Panache Ventures is Patrick Lore. Right from like, I think like, before even like LinkedIn got swarmed by the innovation community, he was posting so much content about, how, about innovation and what his thoughts were, and really leading a Canadian voice on, how innovation should really be guided. So I've been a fan of him and Panache for a long time. How's that been working under that kind of culture of supporting founders?
Yeah, it's been great. And yeah, Pat's incredible just from his own operator experience at iStock Photo, and the rest of the team. I think the whole team kind of brings strengths in different ways, whether that be from the operator side or from kind of later stage investing, helping our founders get to their A's and beyond. I think like one of the things that has been particularly great about just the culture and the fund in general is just the commitment to creating founder synergies within the portfolio. Like we have such a massive portfolio of 100 companies. And so for us, like we don't ever want to be the bottleneck in being able to help founders elevate one another. And so there were so many times, like to give a specific example, there have been so many times that we've been on catch-up calls with our founders and they're like, do you have anyone else in the portfolio who is needed to hire for X role? Or have you, do you know anyone who's gone through this specific challenge with customer acquisition or whatnot, or selling to hospitals or anything like that? And so we have, and I should shout out our amazing director of ops, Roxanne, has done just a fantastic job of reducing us as being the bottleneck and facilitating those connections by, one thing she's done is created this incredible Slack community where all of our founders are able to connect with one another and support each other on a number of topics, whether it be hiring, fundraising, marketing, etc. List goes on. And running these fireside chats where founders can connect with one another. And so I think like one of the big values for me in working with the fund so far is just learning so much from our founders and being able to witness just all of the exciting things that can come out of our founders being able to chat with one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just diving a bit more into, I know you kind of answered this question before with calling out some portfolio companies, but if there's any different ones you can call out, go for it. But any cool companies you met, either already portfolio company or
Sure.
you'd love to have a portfolio company that you would love to shout out?
I would love to shout out Spatula, which is one of our newer investments that I am personally a consumer of. This is not sponsored by Spatula. Hi, Ian, if you're but Spatula basically, so what they're doing and why I'm so obsessed with them is I feel like they have really hit the nail on the head with direct to consumer food options that are at the intersection of quality, convenient, and low cost. Because it basically what they do is they're a direct to consumer food delivery, frozen food delivery service where you subscribe, you can get 3 meals delivered a week or kind of whatever cadence works best for you and your family. The meals that are delivered to you are frozen, so can stay in the freezer for as long as you need till it's time to make them. Once they're ready to go, spatulas cook them to like 90%. And so then you just pop it on the pan, add a bit of water, and it's like in less than 10 minutes, you have an incredible restaurant quality, like truffle risotto with Parmesan. And so I think it's so incredible because if you think of the other players in the space, which are, of course, great, like Instacart and HelloFresh and all of those guys, like Instacart is great for getting your groceries. You still have to make it. Uber Eats, it's not affordable to order Uber Eats every day, even though sometimes I'm guilty of doing that. And then what else is there? And then there's like the HelloFreshes where it's a great experience to learn how to cook, but it's not actually like your food isn't ready in 10 minutes and it's a ton of cleanup. I was a subscriber for a couple of years. And so I think they've like really been able to actually create something that's both high quality and convenient and not super costly. And they're also partnering with like local chefs to create their recipes. And so it's like chefs from Momofuku and all of these different places around the city that are top notch. And Ian's incredible. He used to run strategy for Uber Eats Canada, and so really has a strong understanding of the space. And so yeah, definitely would love to shout out Spatula.
That's awesome. I like how you went right there.
Yeah,
But
you should subscribe and let me know what you think.
yeah, I'm going to like that looks
Perfect.
really
Perfect.
you definitely got them a convert. Um, in terms of in terms of being a generalist fund, right? And talking about it being a fund structure in general, generally like the higher up you are in a fund, like if you're a general manager or principal, you're kind of bogged down in running uh, the firm. And what I've noticed a lot is like associates and analysts, they're the ones that do a lot of the deal sourcing. They bring up cool companies and introduce them to the managing partner. Is it like that at Panache? Like, are you
I
involved in
would
that
say
process?
that the partners are definitely very much so involved in deal flow. I would say just the general process is like just because of the sheer number, like I'm meeting with
Mm,
sometimes 50 companies a week. And so because partners are, managing deal flow and just like the fund itself, managing LP relationships, portfolio companies, and all of that. The associates and analysts will be kind of the front people in terms of taking initial calls, and then say, of the 50 calls I do a week, maybe a handful of the companies are ones that are ones to escalate based on, my opinion and also what I know is the opinion of the firm in terms of the kinds of companies that we would get really excited about. And that's when you kind of bring the partner in, and then they get heavily involved in the deal flow process and the screening process from the perspective of, diligencing the company, meeting the founders and their customers and doing references, digging into the market and all of that. So I would say the partners are definitely involved in deal flow, but more so from the perspective of once there's a company that the associate has already brought to them as being really exciting.
yeah. So speaking of that, like I think earning your stripes as an associate is like having a company you introduce get funded,
Yes.
almost, right?
Yeah.
And have you gone through that round yet? Have you been able to earn your stripe there?
I have, but it's not announced yet. So I don't think
Ah, okay. No worries. That's cool though. How does that make you feel? Like in terms of like meeting with all these different companies and finding this gem that's potentially going to get funded. Like how did that process feel for you?
yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's like we only invest in 0.05%. It's not an exact number, but a very small percentage of the companies that we see. And so it's definitely exciting once you meet a founder that you're really bullish on and excited about, and then the rest of the team shares that excitement is
Hmm.
a really great feeling. And for me, one of the projects I've been kind of spearheading within the firm is around outbound deal sourcing. And so lately we've been spending a lot more time rather than kind of relying on referrals, which of course we still have great relationships with other funds and want to make sure to nurture those and share deal flow with one another. We also have been really focused on just building kind of an outbound engine. And so for me, this company that I'm talking about came from LinkedIn alerts. So I set up alerts on Sales Navigator on LinkedIn, and have like, basically I'm trying to set it up such that if a founder whispers the word stealth and it's somewhere on their LinkedIn page and they used to work at Tesla, then I want to get a notification about it. So I've tried to kind of maneuver my way around Sales Navigator over the last couple of months, and I think we have
Mhm.
a good system now for managing that outbound effort.
That's so interesting. I haven't heard of a sales navigator being utilized like that yet. I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of special tools that
Mhm.
that offer these kind of services. It's like we'll scrape the internet and we'll
Mhm.
find UX. Where do you find the real skill set here? Is it like setting up tools to scrape through all this data and find these analytical points? Is it meeting with people face to face and then seeing the grit in their eyes?
Yeah.
Where do you stand in, like, how do you find that gem?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the alerts are more so just for creating that top of funnel, making sure that you're seeing everything as early as possible. In
Mm,
terms of finding the gem, I would say for me, it's like there's three things that I'm looking for in a deck or when I have a first meeting for a founder. One is this founder uniquely positioned to win in this market? So do they have it, to our point earlier, founder problem fit? Do they have previous entrepreneurial experience? Is their background particularly relevant to the subject? Like looking for some case I can make about why this founder is like in the top 1% of people who understand this domain. And
mm,
so that's the first question I'm asking. The second is this a venture scale opportunity? And so, back of the napkin math, like what would it take for this company to get to 100 million ARR? Is the market even big enough for that? Are they building like another ride sharing app where, for example, like maybe the market is big enough, but the competitive landscape isn't favorable for them? And so that's another question that I'm asking. And then the third one is just around like what is their early engagement? And I think that this is something that maybe differs a little bit from perhaps later stage investors where you have more financial data to analyze. Like we've invested not only pre-revenue but pre-product in cases, and so sometimes you just don't have all of the data that you might like to see from a financial projection perspective to be able to conduct that analysis. And so for us, we'll focus more on whether you have 5 customers, 50 customers, 50,000. Well, if you have 50,000 customers and you just started a month ago, then that's probably really good. But regardless of where you kind of are in that scope, we tend to put a lot of effort and emphasis on like what are your early engagement metrics like with those 5 or 50 customers. How many have churned off the platform? How have you proven that they really need what you're offering? And what is your average contract value? All of that. And so really kind of focus on those early engagement stats. So I would say those are the three things that I'm looking for once I've already kind of connected with a founder, set up an initial meeting, and figured out that at a baseline, it's a fit with the fund from a like location and stage perspective.
mm.
Um, yeah, those are probably the main things. But ultimately, I think like it just comes down to the founders. Like at any stage, especially pre-seed and seed, it just comes down to the team. And is this team uniquely positioned to win? Do they seem resilient? Do they seem like they'll be able to pivot and that they really understand their domain?
Yeah, I love that. I love that focus on the team.
Mhm.
Um, all right. So at this stage, we're wrapping up, but I'd love to get some predictions from you. What does the future
Oh
of
god.
venture VC look like? And you don't have to go too deep into like radical change here, but from your perspective, any gaps that you see that are naturally being filled or needs to be filled, and go for that.
Yeah, a couple things. So one is, and we've been building out a thesis around what we're calling verticalized communities. And so to give a specific example of that, we invested in a company called Cobol. Basically, they are building this essentially masterclass platform for parents and families from trying to conceive through to going back to work when you have an infant. And so what they've done is they've solved the problem of parents typically have to go to all these disparate resources like Facebook groups and in-person classes, go to their doctor, go to friends and family to get all of this advice on how to navigate that very complicated and emotionally draining journey at times. And so they've put that all into one platform where they can connect with one another, find community, get expert validated content, and so have really built a vertical community play in a space where people are often having to go to horizontal platforms like Facebook or whatnot to find their people. And so I think building like subscription communities based around a specific need or kind of life stage is something that we've been spending a lot of time focusing on. I mean, of course, we've seen a lot of activity in the Web3 space, and everyone's kind of keeping a pulse on what we think is going to happen there, and as are we. So are kind of starting to look in that general domain. I also think like clean tech and carbon accounting is a space that we're going to see more and more so, especially with just regulatory changes as of late, where companies are having to hold themselves accountable and having to release information about their carbon accounting and offsetting and all of that. So I think those are three categories that we're for sure starting to pay attention to.
I love that. And yeah, we've heard a lot about communities, definitely, but I love your explanation of how that term verticalized community building. I think that's really interesting. Sarah, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here. I think you gave us a lot of wealth of knowledge and a lot of things to think about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Next time I'll wear AirPods. I apologize for all of my pings in the background, but I am so grateful for you having me on the show.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.